Hey everybody, this is Robbo at the bench for another pocket knife review today. Today we are doing the very famous classic Kershaw Skyline. This is a legendary flipper that Kershaw offers and has taken almost a cult following in the knife community, and for pretty good reason. This is a gem of a knife. So let's get into it. So this is the Kershaw Skyline. The Skyline comes in all kind of different configurations. I think you can get the Damascus steel version. I think you can get colored G10 handles. I think even they do the black coated blade. But all those different options really dramatically increase the price on what is otherwise, I believe, a $30 to $35 knife. I want to say I paid maybe $25 when I saw a deal pop up for it. But I want to say the list price is somewhere between 30 and 40 bucks, which is not bad considering the fact that that this blade is a USA made knife, and so for that price, it's fantastic, especially given that the steel is not AUS 8 or 813 MOV, CR MOV. I always get that mixed up. But given that it's not a Chinese steel and that it's a good, I think, S30V steel, makes it a great budget USA knife. Size comparisons. So here's the Kershaw Skyline. Here's one of my favorites, the Ontario Rat 2. And let me pull out of my pocket the Spyderco Delica. These are the ones that I pretty much show as size comparisons, just given the fact that these are all fairly close in size. You can tell that the Kershaw Skyline has a broader blade than the Rat 2, and a fuller blade than the Spyderco Delica 4, which does have that broad leaf-shaped blade but tapers down to a little point. The Skyline, just the blade looks like more of a hard use kind of utilitarian knife, whereas the Delica looks a little bit more like a finesse blade. So good size, very ergonomic, at least in my hands. I think I have, somewhat large hands, and this fits really nicely, especially that very deep finger choil right there. So let's talk about stuff besides the blade first, and then we'll get to the blade. So first of all, flipper action of this knife. So this is different both from the Delica and the Rat. So the Delica is a lockback. The Delica, you're not going to be flipping open. You're going to be using that kind of spidey hole there. The Ontario Rat is a flipper, not a flipper, I'm sorry, is just your traditional thumb stud knife that is very quick deploying. This is a flipper, so this has this kind of button flipper here. A lot of people get frustrated with this because they do that right there, which is if you just push this down expecting it to be spring-loaded or expecting it to have a little more action, kind of like you would do with the Kershaw Leak, it's going to do that. And it's going to just kind of TP there, and that's going to be really frustrating, especially because the thumb stud on this guy is really small compared to something like the Rat. You can see there's just really not a whole lot to grip right there. So this lever really does need to be pushed like you're pushing or I guess flipping a light switch or something. You do need to put some force into kind of pulling your finger back, but when you do that, it does lock up really nicely, and it's kind of a nice, nice little action there. I will say though, it can be really frustrating when you're pulling this knife out to cut something open and you kind of half kind of pull that. That's really frustrating for me. But otherwise, a nice little flipper. G10 scales. I think I've talked about this in other videos, but I am a big fan of these scales. These are probably my favorite G10 scales on a knife that's in the $40 range or under. I talked about it before, but the Ontario Rat scales really disappointed me, and some other ones, but these are just grippy enough to where I can feel it, but not so that it's uncomfortable. And so it's just a really nice look and feel. So I really like that. It's kind of utilitarian, but it looks nice. You can see that on this knife there are two scales on either side, so this is not a frame lock, and only that one liner, which means that this knife is pretty light compared to other knives, especially like the Kershaw Emerson CQC7 that I've reviewed. This knife is very light. I think even on the Rat you've got two liners in there, which, I mean, this is not a heavy knife by any means, but you know, for what this knife is used for, that single liner is going to be just fine. All right, so let's talk about the clip. So I really like this clip. So this is just a typical Kershaw clip. I like how broad this clip is. So it's a pretty fat clip, and the fact that it doesn't really protrude very far. So again, since these are the knives that I have on hand, let's take a look at side by side. So if you look at something like the Delica and you look at the Kershaw, you can see the Delica just sticks out a lot farther than the Kershaw, and the Kershaw tapers down much quicker. The same is true for the Rat. So of these clips, I much prefer this. This has very nice play in it. It's just loose enough without being too loose, but still, this, for whatever reason, I think just works much better. Just because, to me, you don't need a clip to stick out this far down. If you have enough to get kind of over your pockets right here, then that's all you really need. The rest is going to just be tension. So to me, it's just kind of wasted space if you have a clip that's going to extend all the way down. That said, though, I actually don't end up carrying this knife clipped to the pants very often, even though this is a pretty fairly deep carry, I guess, considering some other knives. It's not super deep. I actually carry this in the pocket alongside my wallet in this little leather kind of slip that I made. And this is just some leftover leather. I kind of left the edge that was on it there just to kind of match the profile of the Skyline. But basically, this allows me to carry side by side, upright in the pocket, so the knife is pretty readily available. I left the suede side on one piece of this leather just so to add some kind of grippiness in the pocket, and this works pretty well for some, a place like work or something. If you don't want to be seen carrying a pocket knife on the outside of your pants, something like this works great. And my wallet is thin and small enough that that this isn't too bulky in the pocket. All right, so let's talk about the blade now. So I love the handles on this knife. I like the size. I love the finger choil. It's absolutely perfect. The blade is actually probably the spot where I have the most dislikes with this knife. Before I get there, let me note too, there's no jimping on this blade, and I really think that that's a mistake. You actually have some down here on the liner, which is fine. I don't really feel that because I'm pushing that to the side. I'm not really pushing up against that. But if they had just put something like that right up here, that would have been plenty. As it is, this is not only no jimping, but this is kind of that stonewash, really smooth steel, and that's kind of annoying that there's nothing there. The blade itself, the steel is great. I really like this steel. It holds an edge for a while. Takes a little bit longer to sharpen, I'm sorry, but the steel holds up very well. I notice a big difference between something like this and the Aussate steel of the Delica. Of the Ontario Rat 2. The Aussate is fine, and I like it. I can get it pretty sharp, but it just tends to nick and kind of fold a little bit easier. This really does hold a great edge. In fact, I handed this knife to my dad the other day to open a package when I was visiting him, and he immediately cut himself because it slipped through the tape of the package so smoothly, and so he was impressed by the sharpness. The blade shape is great. This is probably one of my favorite just utilitarian blade shapes. It's nice and broad, does taper down. It has this kind of drop point, which is nice. And it has these kind of facets across the top, which I think is nice because it helps the blade to taper down a little bit more. So I use this blade a lot for prying things because it's nice and fat up here, and I'm not going to be super worried about breaking off the tip of this blade like I would be with others. You can actually see, I think, on my blade all those scratches because of how often I find myself doing that and using this thing to pry. So for that reason, it's a great blade shape. It's just thick enough to where I'm not going to be worried about it, but it cuts very well. My gripe with this blade is actually the grind that comes from the factory. So for the Rat, for example, it's a very nice thick grind, and it's very easy to sharpen, and it's very easy to cut with. It really slices through. The same is true on something like the Delica. It's just a broad tapered grind there, and I really like that. For whatever reason, I've always had issues with this. I'm not exactly sure what it is, or if you can see this, but from the factory, this does not come with a very broad grind, edge grind. I don't know if you can tell, but even up here towards the tip of the blade, it's a little bit wider, and it kind of gets smaller there and then back to wide here. I read something about the fact that if it's a steeper, or I guess not as steep of an angle, that it's a stronger edge. But for me, it just doesn't work very well. I never feel confident sharpening this guy. I never really feel like it's a slicer per se. I always feel like this is more of a brute force knife. Whereas something like this is very quick to sharpen and slices very, very easily. This edge is fine for kind of harder use, and I guess I can see the benefit of that. But for whatever reason, I've never really been a fan. That being said, if that's the biggest drawback for a knife, reprofile the edge and you're done. I'll probably do that at some point. I typically leave the factory edge on just to try and see what the manufacturer was going for. For the Kershaw, I've had it for a few years and I'm not a fan still, so I probably will reprofile that pretty soon. So in conclusion, cut or carry, definite carry. This is a fantastic knife. This is great for a camping trip. This is great for the office. It's just an all-around utilitarian blade that I have tremendous confidence in. It locks up great. The finger choil is really nice and deep with that flipper acting as a finger guard, and the detent right here that the thumb stud just locks into. Whenever this knife locks up, there's just a lot of confidence that you're going to get done what you need to get done. The fact that it's made in the USA, tremendous benefit as well, and definitely adds a lot to this knife. So go out and grab one if you don't already have it. Go out and grab another one if you do. This is a great little knife. All right, until next time, thanks.